Hi, everyone. We're going to examine today whether about the word grace. Did Jesus use this word grace to mean it is merited? Is this concealed from Christians by translation? And why? Yes, Jesus uses the word 4 times, grace, but you're never allowed to see it. But today you're going to see it. And this is another reason why this episode is part of number 10 of mistranslations to help Paul, because there's no reason to not translate Jesus correctly as grace, as you'll see. Now, here are the passages. On the top left is how it should read with grace, and there they are the way you see them in all the Bibles: benefit, benefit, or credit, and thank. And just totally eviscerate Jesus speaking about grace. So you can't even hear him speaking about the thing that Paul talks about all the time, but you never get to hear about it from Jesus. We're going to show you how it makes a big, big difference. And then you can understand what grace to Jesus, what he thinks it is. And it's the opposite of what Paul thinks it is. Now, just want to show you an email I received years ago and how I responded. And this is just to give you the synopsis of what I'll show you by proof. Correspondent asked me about the meaning of grace in the New Testament. I responded that Jesus and Luke used the term 4 times, but it is translated so we don't see this and how differently Jesus used the term versus how Paul used it. The word grace means favor. Well, what kind of favor, though? It can be earned or it can be unearned. What does it mean without loading it up or redefining it? That's another important issue we'll get into. Jesus used it to mean earned favor and only earned favor. So the understanding Jesus had and the person translating this word knew that if you put the word grace in there, Jesus was using it in an opposite way of Paul, and they didn't want you to see that. So that's why it was removed and other substitute words were used. And Paul used it to mean unearned favor, and that's because of Ephesians 2:8-9. We're saved by grace, not works. We're saved by grace by faith, not works. And that was to redefine the term so no condition of actions were necessary. You just have to have a mental assent in your head. Here is what I wrote explaining this to a correspondent. Finally, a little lesson about grace as Jesus used it 4 times in Luke. Notice, by the way, Paul's companion, right? He's got it right. Luke's got it right. So this is what Luke sees. And so Luke actually truthfully renders Jesus's words correctly as charis. Let's continue. A contributor to my site found this, and it was a nice lady, Nancy, as I recall. Jesus's words are never translated as grace, but that is the word, the same as Paul's charis in Greek. This is in Luke 6, verse 32, 33, and 34. And then again in Luke 17:9. 4 times Jesus uses this word for grace. Jesus understood in these 4 passages that grace means merited favor. So Jesus says, what grace do you receive if you love those who love you? Because even heathen do so. Hence, you did not merit favor or grace for such a deed, as it serves your self-interest. But if you do something worthy of favor, that is grace, Jesus says you will receive grace, i.e. God's favor. So now you know why charis is rendered as thanks, benefit, credit in most Protestant Bibles rather than grace. And thus you don't see Jesus use grace the opposite of the meaning of Paul. Just a tidbit. Here is a link to the contributor's article. So then Nancy had a web page at that time, and it's no longer active, so I can't link it to you. Anyway, so let me show you the mistranslated version of this so you can't even understand what Jesus is saying completely. And that's the terrible thing. Not only does it change, not allow Jesus to comment on the meaning of the word grace or charis, it literally makes these verses not make any sense to you. Let's listen. Verse 32. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? Benefit. It has nothing to do with benefit. Charis has nothing to do with benefit. For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? Grace, charis, has nothing to do with the meaning of benefit. For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Charis has nothing to do with credit. Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. Luke 6, verses 32 to 34. True grace, which is merited favor, is a benefit to you. It is a credit to you, but that's not what the word means. It means favor. So they're using abstractions away from, or to not use a word that would trigger what you should be hearing. Luke 17, verses 8 to 9 also uses charis and is rendered to obscure this fact by the red highlighted translation that follows. Prepare supper for me and dress properly and serve me. This is a master talking to a servant, while I eat and drink. And after you will eat and drink. Does he thank the servant? Jesus asks this question. Does he give charis the servant to the servant? What is that about? You'll see. Because he did what was commanded. Other translations say, is the master thankful, meaning giving grace because the servant did what was commanded. Now, again, it's an abstraction. Just say the word. Does he give him grace to the servant for doing exactly what he was told and did nothing special, nothing beyond the minimal necessary activity, but not anything beyond that? Very lukewarm. And we're going to get into that in a second. Now I want you to hear it in the true sense, and then pay attention that it means favor. And Jesus is obviously has an understanding it means merited favor, because he's saying you won't you won't get grace unless you've merited it. If you do not do something beyond a certain point, you have to do something more than just have favor. You to get God's favor, to have favor, to get grace, you have to do something more than just the minimal. Listen to what he says. If you love those who love you, what grace will that bring you? In other words, what merit is that giving you in God's eyes? Because why? Because you are simply doing something that is normal. Somebody loves you, you love them. That's easy to do. God doesn't give you commands that are just this minimalistic. Love your brother. See, and this is the other thing. People say, love your neighbor as yourself, and that you satisfied all the commands. No, that's the second most important command. But Jesus is actually saying, for just loving other people who already love you, it doesn't even count. Loving your neighbor only really has value or merit to God. Grace in God's eyes will be given. Favor will be given to you when it's your enemy, when it's somebody hates you, who does not love you, and you yet show them love. See, that's what the lesson is. For even sinners love those who love them. In other words, even people who have no love for God will do the same thing that you're doing, and you're using that as your justification to say to God, I'm worthy of favor, I'm worthy of grace. Of course, if you're a Protestant Christian, you don't even think you have to be worthy of grace, but Jesus does, and that's the whole point. He's making a lesson that grace I will not be given you, favor from God will not be given to you for doing things that sinners do already, just out of self-interest. And verse 33, and if you do good to those who do good to you, what grace will that bring you? What favor, what merited favor will that bring to you with God? For even sinners do the same. Same point. So Jesus is making this point redundant, that you can't miss it. You can't ignore the fact that grace cannot be obtained by the most, what anyone else would do who doesn't even love God. So this is this idea that you, by loving your neighbor as yourself, means loving someone who already loves you, or someone who's already doing a lot of good for you. No, 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 no. What he's talking about is loving your neighbor when they're unlovable, when they're not doing any good for you, when they do not love you, when they hate you, when they're your enemy. You've got to do good to them. Then you will merit grace. Do you get it now? That's what Jesus was saying, and that's what they've covered up, lied to you, changed the meaning of the word, put something in it doesn't mean, a much more abstract term, and you don't get it. And why wouldn't they do that? Why can't you be trusted to know the truth that Jesus sees grace completely 180 degrees different than Paul? Because you are not allegedly adult enough to know and make your own decision about God, about grace. You've got to hear the lie over and over again from Paul that it's by you're saved by grace, by faith, through you're saved by grace. Excuse me. You're saved by faith through grace and not of works, lest any man should boast. As if what Jesus is talking about, look at what Paul would say. This is wrong. Jesus is wrong because he's saying if you do good to people who don't like you, you could end up boasting, and therefore this is not a criteria for true grace. We have to erase these words from Jesus, and that's his agents, his theological translators have gone behind your back, my back, and changed the word of God, so the words of Jesus, to fraudulently convey to you something it doesn't convey: benefit and thanks. Keep going. Now keep on going. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, if you literally are expecting to get money back, you lend them money. You get what? What grace, what merited favor will that bring you? Nothing, because you're just getting exactly back what you expected. But what if you gave a loan to someone and said, "You pay me back when you can," but you know they can never pay you back. But if they paid you back, it'd be a miracle. Great. God would have blessed them and gave them some inheritance, who knows what, and they pay you back. But you're giving it at the time where clearly there's no chance they can give it back to you. That's true merited favor, not lukewarm. You're giving it to someone who's going to pay you back. There's no charity in that. There's no merited grace. Let's use the word the way it's translated everywhere else in the Bible, exactly the same way. So you are not deceived that Paul cannot change the word and give it a new or different meaning. Even sinners lend to sinners to get the same amount. So the same point, he's made this over and over 3 times, same point. Merited grace, merited favor cannot be on the basis of what what a sinner would expect to get back, or what a sinner would do anyway, just out of self-interest. It has to be some form of merited favor. In each of these instances, it's love, altruism, generosity, and doing good. Okay, that's what he's saying. If you do these things, then you have grace from God, forgiveness. Luke 17:8-9. Prepare supper for me and dress properly and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterward you will eat and drink. Does he show grace to the servant because he did what was commanded? So does the owner, the landowner, does he owe any merited favor to this person when he's just doing exactly what he was told to do? In other words, people say, well, I go to work every day and I'm doing good to my boss, and I'm doing exactly what I'm told. I'm not doing anything exceptional. I'm not going above and beyond the call of duty to do even a fantastic job for my boss. I'm just doing exactly what he told me to do. Get my dinner. And you do it. Jesus is saying that's not going to merit you any favor with God. You will merit you no grace in God's eyes. So don't look at your job and say, "Hey, I've done a great thing today. I pray God will bless me for what I did today." The answer is no. Not if you just did exactly the minimal work you're supposed to do. But if you did something over and beyond and you merited the grace, you merited the favor, now we're talking. Now we're talking. And I'm going to show you where Jesus talks about this somewhere else. So this is, what would you call each of the people who are doing things for self-interest, just out of going through basically the motions of doing some work, lending money to someone who's going to pay you back, loving people who already love you, doing good to those who love you. You're living in a lukewarm world. You're not doing anything really above and beyond what sinners do, right? So you are in this, what we would call a lukewarm category. Now let me show you something here. Revelation 3 verses 14-19 talks about a church of Laodicea that has this problem. Skip to verse 15. I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would that thou wert cold or hot. So Jesus is specifically talking about works. What did he say in Luke? Where grace was obtained, where was that? Where you did good deeds that you did that a sinner would not do. You were not lukewarm. You were doing things that really cost you something, showed some zeal to please God, and that's why you're going to merit grace or favor. Let's go to verse 16. So then, because thou art lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew you out of my mouth. Now, actually, what's important is to know something about the geography of Laodicea, and I'm going to show you that in a second, thanks to a video by a young lady online, and I'll get to that in a second. But let me show you what Jesus says is their symptoms, and you'll see a lot of connection to what I just read you from Luke. And basically, in Luke, what did you see? People who already would pay you back, you loan to, instead of loaning it to people who can't pay you back. Is that charity? Yes. What about doing good to those who aren't doing good to you and your enemy? And you're showing them what? You're showing them charity. You're showing them concern above and beyond what they deserve because they're your enemy. And so all of his examples were the same. And with the boss who asked you to prepare their dinner, and you do exactly what you're told, but you do nothing on top of that. You just are just a servant who does exactly what they're told, but nothing more. You don't merit any favor. You don't merit any grace. So So that means you're never trying to go above and beyond. You have no zeal to do good. You're just simply doing good to get a paycheck or to get back the same amount of goodness you give, or the same amount of loan that you loaned, you'll get back. Follow me? Now listen to what he says about these people. What's their sickness, spiritual sickness? Because you say, I am rich and increased with goods, and I have need of nothing, and knowest not that thou art wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. What is he talking about? You think you're rich, but you're poor because you hoard all this money. You are doing nothing for the kingdom. You're doing nothing to help people. You're doing nothing that God wants you to do with that wealth. I counsel thee to buy me gold tried in the fire, that thou mayst be rich, and white raiment. Gold. There's something tried in the fire. What would be tried in the fire? That's going to be something that's going to be a lot more costly, and you have to do a serious, zealous effort. And he's going to get to it in the very last line there. That thou mayest be rich, and white raiment. Where does the white raiment come? It comes from these works that are zealous for God, not just to, not just to look good in front of men, but to please God, to show love to God. And thou mayest be clothed, and the shame of thy nakedness do not appear, and anoint thine eyes with eye salve, that thou mayest see. So you're blind right now because you're listening to Paul, who teaches you you're going to be saved by just believing in some fact, and not by doing any works. And therefore, if you did any works, you'd be risking your salvation by boasting. Well, the antidote to that is not to disobey Jesus here, where he tells you to do those works. It's actually to obey Jesus and then don't boast. That's the solution. Paul gives you the solution. Don't go. He cripples you to think that if you go beyond just simply faith and try to do works, you're going to end up at being a boasting liar, and you'll be condemned to go to hell because you did good works and cause yourself to be tempted to sin into boasting. Do you see the absolute perversion of Paul to the message of Jesus Christ? I hope you see it. Now, here's Jesus' answer, an antidote and counter message to the epistles of Paul. 19, as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous, therefore, and repent. Zealous, therefore, and repent. And what does Jesus have to do? And what is he doing right now as I speak to you? He's rebuking you and chastening you by showing you that the word grace did not mean unmerited favor. The way Paul used it, it meant the opposite. It meant merited favor. And Jesus did it 4 times, not once, not twice, not 3 times, 4 times, so that these corrupt translators could not get away with it when it was finally exposed. And ladies and gentlemen, that's what the internet's doing. People are finally going to hear the truth that is suppressed when you go to church on Saturday or Sunday or wherever you go. That is that people will lie for Paul. They will mistranslate text to protect and make Paul look okay. If you heard what Jesus said here, I am sure you would have begun to question Paul. And that's what you got to do. I've shown you where the verses are. I've shown you how to translate them. Double check me. Verify, test, and verify. Now I want to show you something else. This young lady, and I'm going to play her video in a second because she deserves credit for this information. And she's also going to explain to you what the verb pisto means in Greek. And that's, I've made a lot of episodes on the definition of pisto. Pisto can mean in the passive trust, and that's what she was told at Pepperdine in a theology class. So she's relaying that and saying, hey, so pisto doesn't just mean believe, from what she learned in theology class. Pepperdine is a Church of Christ university, so this is as far as they went, but it obviously means more when it's not in the passive, which in John, for example, all those usages 30 times, it's in the active present participle or some active present tense. Therefore, they all mean, according to NIV Theological, you have to obey unto Christ. But anyway, I just want to show you, she's thinking outside the box, and she realizes that defining salvation by faith alone makes no sense to God. So please welcome Lizzie to provide her excerpt here in her article, video article, Saved by Faith Alone is Against the Bible, and you can find it at YouTube.
And I think this faith alone salvation did irrefutable theological damage. Meaning of faith. So I took Koine Greek, the language of the New Testament, when I was a freshman and sophomore at Pepperdine. So the Greek word pisteuo, faith, does not mean believing without evidence, or anything really about believing in the intellectual assent to an idea type way. Pisteuo is not coming to an intellectual conclusion, accepting a premise, but pisteuo, I believe, it means entrusting your life to a cause. So I think that trust through actions is the best understanding of the Greek word for faith. So now we're going to get to some Bible verses. So I hear a lot of people say things like living out your faith, but the Bible says, James 2:17, faith without works is dead. Revelation 3:16. So, because you are lukewarm, this is Jesus talking, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. And this verse in Revelation, a lot of people think it's about like how passionate you're being about God, but this was written to the church in Laodicea, and there were literally two rivers. There's a cold water river and a hot water river coming in the city. So that's what they would have associated it with. And the lukewarm water was not useful. Like the hot water could be useful for some medicinal thing. I honestly don't know what the different waters were useful for, but the point was they were not being useful in their faith. They were not living it out, being Jesus to other people. And so it's not just like, guys, be more passionate about your faith. Guys, live out your faith more. It's like, no, James is saying you are dead. Jesus is saying, I'm spitting you out of my mouth. It's not like, oh, their faith is kind of weak. It's like, no, that's literally not faith if you don't have actions and works. Sorry, I'm getting so angry about this. The reason this makes me so angry, though, is I feel like this is encouraging a culture of apathy. Intrinsically, the biblical definition of faith is that it does not exist if it is not accompanied by actions.
So what is one of the most important passages to back up what Lizzie is saying? The parable of the sheep and the goats. Because it's very clear, Jesus says what he's going to do. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another. He's talking about himself. As a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. This is nobody but Jesus. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand. He's saying this, he's the king. Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me meat, and I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in, naked, and you clothed me, and I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Then shall the righteous, see, there is such a thing as righteous. Oh, yeah, Paul quotes out of context Psalm 14, there's no none righteous. Well, yeah, there's a half of the text is about unrighteous people, and the other half is about righteous people. And God says, I'm in the generation of righteousness, but I digress. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, Kyrios, whence saw we thee hungry and fed thee, or thirsty and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger and took you in, or naked and clothed you? Or when saw we you sick or in prison and came unto thee? Verse 40 of Matthew 25, it continues. And the king, that's Jesus, he's made it clear. This is the Son of Man. He's telling you this is exactly how he's going to act. The king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, you have done it unto me. Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. But both groups called him Lord. He is talking about that people who call on him as Lord in both groups, they're not separate. The only difference is one does righteous works, taking care of the food, the needs of clothing, food, water, and even visiting in prison people. And they who do that are the righteous. So Paul teaches contrary to Jesus that there's no righteous when Jesus says there are. And that's his criterion for judgment. And Paul has erased for you and I. If we took him seriously and we took Paul seriously, we would think that this isn't even a threat. But Jesus cannot be anything other than what he just said. Now I want to read you something, and I'll tell you in a minute how this is explained away. Simon Gathercole says, where is the boasting? Early Jewish soteriology, and Paul's response in Romans 1-5. Yes, where is the boasting in this? You're doing exactly what you're told. There is no boasting. Don't boast, and that solves Paul's alleged reasoning that you have to have faith alone. There's no option of just doing what Jesus said and not boasting. That is a full option. And I love the title, Where is the Boasting? You don't need to boast. Deeds of hospitality are certainly the criterion for judgment. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We'll also listen to James 2. What does it profit? Now, the real words are, what good is it? And I'll show that to you in a second. My brethren, though a man say he has faith and have not works, can faith save him? It's a rhetorical question, meaning no, faith cannot save you. Go look up the word rhetorical question if you don't understand that. But Greek is very frequently doing that, and Paul uses rhetorical questions almost every chapter, and it's his favorite tool. James has the same idea. Can faith save him? No. If a brother, and then he's going to prove it. If a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, what is he invoking? He's invoking what we just read, the sheep and the goats. 16, and one of you say unto them, depart in peace, be ye warm, be filled, notwithstanding you give them not those things which are needful to the body. What good is it? Even so, faith, if it has not works, is dead, being alone. There's no good to a faith that's alone, that's faith alone, and it's going to send you to hell. That's the message of Paul. It will send you to hell if you believe it and follow it and don't care about your works and don't do charity to the poor. Don't do what you're supposed to do as Christ demanded and said is inexcusable if you don't do it. And here's just the proof that if you go to the Mount C Transliteral, you see it is not what does it profit, it is what good is it. So it has Jesus is saying it has, James is saying it has no intrinsic value at all. It's not an issue of profit or gain. So that's just a mistranslation. And just so you know, clearly, as I said, James is invoking the parable of the sheep and the goats, because if you parallel James' words almost verbatim with the parallel to Matthew, so you can take a look at the screen afterwards. And where does this come from? The Torah. So I've said before, Jesus makes the Torah closer, more proximate to our heart, fulfilling the prophecy of the new covenant in Jeremiah 31:31, which is to put what? The Torah more on our hearts. And how do you do that? You make it so it's more memorable. The parable of the sheep and the goats is extremely memorable. Just people that are disgusted by it because it contradicts Paul, and they will not teach it. And what will they teach you? They will teach you it's going to only be true in some future dispensation, but not in the current dispensation. They ignore the fact of the matter is Jesus says, when the Son of Man comes and has judgment, that is when he comes back. So this is a totally fraudulent answer and should be disregarded. So here's the Torah source of what Jesus is looking at. When there is with thee any needy one of your brethren in any one of the cities in your land with which Yahweh your God is giving to you, you do not harden your heart nor shut your hand from the needy brother, for you do certainly open your hand to him or her, and do certainly lend to him or her sufficient for his lack which he lacks. That's Deuteronomy 15:7-8. So Jesus didn't make this stuff up. It's in the law, and he's telling that everybody who follows him, you've got to do exactly what it says in Deuteronomy 15:7-8, and if you don't, you will be sent to the same place where the devil and his angels go. It's also matches John 5. If you look at this, it's written in 90 to 100 AD. This is 30 years after Paul is dead. He's writing that this is what Jesus taught. John verses 28-29 KJV. Marvel not at this, for the hour is coming in which all that are in the grave shall hear his voice and shall come forth. And they that have done good things unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil things, it's a plural there, unto the resurrection of damnation. Jesus makes the criterion of your salvation not on your faith. And this is in John's gospel, which everyone thinks is faith alone, which it isn't. The criterion of your salvation, Jesus just said here, is that you did good things. Not that you had faith. No. Did you do good things? Faith is just assumed. That's just like so basic. Like, why would that even be a consideration? It's what are your works? If you don't have them, it's as if you had no faith. Okay? It matches also this in Revelation 22:14, and I believe this is the angel speaking Jesus's words. So remember, there's an angel at the beginning, at the end, who speaks Jesus' words and states, "Happy are the ones doing his commandments, so that their right will be to the tree of life, and they shall enter by the gates into the city." His commandments means the Lord God, Yahweh's commandments, the Father. And therefore you will then enter into the city. This was the KJV, and of course this has been corrupted too. They take it out and wash the robes from a very late variant and ignore all the earlier variants and the clear quotes in the 200s by at least two sources, and I have this all in a video, but they ignore it and they will not change. They have stubbornly stuck to this, even though the King James had it right. But they will not give up. There's at least 5 Bibles, mainline Bibles, that will not change it and to the way it originally read. And this is it. All right. So, in conclusion, what we have found out is this passage or passages, Luke 6:32 to 34, Luke 17:18-9, have been mistranslated deliberately to protect Paul and change the word from grace to benefit and credit, which are never even defined, true definitions in Greek of these words. And the true word is grace. And so it's clearly Jesus is saying the word grace, the way he's using it is merited favor. So, by the way, here's the irony of ironies. If you use Jesus's meaning of word, you are saved by grace alone. The grace as defined by Jesus, merited favor. But you're not saved by grace alone as defined and redefined by Paul, contrary to even the meaning of the word grace in Greek. That's what I'm trying to say to you, ladies and gentlemen. Paul has literally changed in English and in post Paul world the meaning of a word that in Greek did not mean unmerited favor. The word grace always meant merited favor. So that's all. So you could actually say to someone, I do believe in grace alone, not faith alone. I believe in grace alone, because the only way to get saved is to have God's forgiveness. And the only way to get that grace is to do what he says and merit it, which gets us all the way back to Exodus chapter 20, verse 6. God says, I extend my love to those who I extend my mercy to those who love me and obey my commandments. All right. I hope that helps everyone understand a very significant and important mistranslation to help Paul. God bless. Take care, everybody.